Following the Second World War, there were many military generals and commanders who were sentenced to death for a number of crimes. It would be the end of the conflict where Benito Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy, was executed at the side of a road by Italian partisans. Following this, his body was then strung up in a market square and was displayed in public. There were many former fascists who were executed at the end of the war, and one of those who was executed and was shot in the back was Emilio De Bono. His execution was considered incredibly humiliating, and it was considered a stain to the honour of a soldier to be executed in this way. But what was the story of Mussolini's general who was shot in the back? Join us today as we find out, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Emilio De Bono was the descendant of a wealthy count, and he entered the Royal Italian Army in 1884 as a second lieutenant and fought in the Italo-Ethiopian War, and he first worked his way up to the general staff. He was awarded the Knight's Cross, and then as the First World War broke out, he fought and became a distinguished soldier against Austria-Hungary. He rose to positions of leadership, and during the war was awarded 3 silver medals of military valour, and in 1920 he was a Major General. However, in the early 1920s, he was part of the National Fascist Party, and he helped to organise a group. He was part of the organisation of the March on Rome, and this started the fascist regime in Italy. Following the march and Mussolini's accession to power, De Bono served as a chief of police, and also the commander of the fascist militia. He was later tried for being involved in the death of a leftist politician, but was acquitted, and he was later appointed Minister of Colonial Affairs, and he mixed with the Italian royalty. In November 1932, Mussolini asked De Bono to write a plan for the invasion of Ethiopia, and the plan said a small force would move south and establish strong bases against a weak enemy. De Bono thought it would be easy, cheap and safe to do this, and Mussolini then involved the army in the planning, and the army developed a massive campaign which involved around 6 times more soldiers than De Bono envisioned. De Bono then became in 1935 the supreme commander of the Italian operation against Ethiopia, and Mussolini wanted not just an Italian victory but a fascist one. His forces crossed into Ethiopia, and he entered the city of Axum riding a white horse, but De Bono then became the Marshal of Italy, and Mussolini got fed up with the slow invasion and progress. In 1940, De Bono, as the Second World War broke out, began to be pressed into military service again. He was commanding a southern defensive group in Sicily, and shockingly he was against the Italian involvement in the Second World War. He wrote a report on the condition of his soldiers, and he said they were poor, but then he was appointed the Minister of State in 1942. The following year he was part of the fascist Grand Council that voted to oust Mussolini, and a motion of no confidence was signed off, which led to the fall of Mussolini and his arrest and imprisonment. But Mussolini would then be freed from captivity by the Nazis during the Gran Sasso Raid, and he was installed in northern Italy as the head of a new Nazi puppet state, the Italian Social Republic. Mussolini would see those who voted against him as treasonous and backstabbers, and he then ordered De Bono to be arrested and tried for treason at Verona in the Verona Trial. This was a show trial held in the Italian Social Republic in January 1944, and it was said by one of the witnesses that, "For me it is certain that the trial was a farce, that the execution was the work of the Germans, that Mussolini had almost nothing to do any longer with the whole affair. He is now almost invisible, the shadow of a puppet. Above all, that with this whole affair, one wants to deter primarily internal opponents." But during the trial, Emilio De Bono was found guilty of treason and was sentenced to death for it. Mussolini saw him as a disgraceful traitor, and along with Galeazzo Ciano, Luciano Cottardi, Giovanni Marinella, and Carlo Paresci, he was to be executed. Ciano was the Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs and Mussolini's son-in-law. Cottardi was the former president of the Fascist Confederation of Industrial Workers. Marinelli was the former chief of the fascist militia, and Paresci was the former agriculture minister. The only one at trial to escape execution was Tullio Chianetti, who was a minister of corporations. He was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment. By ordering these executions, Mussolini was stamping down on those who ousted him from power, and he was effectively executing a large part of his former government. Emilio De Bono was taken out of Verona, and just outside of the town, He was taken to a clearing and was dropped off next to an embankment. Alongside him were the other men who had been sentenced to death. It was a freezing cold January morning. The executions and firing squad had been summoned, and opposite them were a number of wooden chairs and stools for the condemned individuals to be sat on. Emilio De Bono was led away on one of the chairs, and he was tied to it to make sure he could not escape or run away. He was turned around after being tied tightly, and the firing squad were readied. De Bono was awaiting his death, and he was sat facing away from the firing squad, which was seen as an act of humiliation, and he was not allowed to bravely face his executioners. De Bono would state after the death sentence was read out, "You barely got me, I'm 78, and he complained about the fact he was going to be shot in the back. He believed he was a proud man and a proud soldier who had served Italy for most of his life, and had laid down his life for his country on a number of occasions. The firing squad was readied, and the order to fire was given, and despite the firing squad not being the most skilled, De Bono was instantly killed. One of the other defendants, Galeazzo's execution, did not go well, as he jumped forward in an act of defiance and turned his chair around, and screamed "Long live Italy," as the men fired their bullets into his chest. He was the only one shot in the chest, as De Bono and the rest were killed by bullets to the back. A number of the condemned, it was said, were not killed instantly, and some were left to bleed out from their wounds, or suffer a coup de grace to the head. But Emilio De Bono was a man who rose to prominence alongside Benito Mussolini, and he was a soldier who had a long history inside of the Italian military. Ultimately he would turn on Mussolini and vote to oust him from power, and he did not want Italy to become involved in the Second World War, despite at times throughout his life being seen as a warmonger. He held a number of important positions in the Italian military and in the government, but he was shot at the side of an embankment by a firing squad. By being shot in the back, this was seen as a humiliating end for the once proud military commander, Emilio De Bono. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. And once again, thank you so much for watching.